Okay, so the figure below is a triangular prism. It's asking for the volume. So because it is a prism, you are using V equals area of the base times the height. So when you find area of the base, you're looking at the triangle here. Okay, so you have the base and the height. So the base is 8. The height is 6. And then the height of the prism is going to be 12. So now that we know the numbers we need to multiply, then I could take half of 8, which is 4, times 6, times 12. 4 times 6 is 24. And times 12, we're going to do the math. So that's 8, 4, 4, 2. So that's going to be 288. Okay, the 10 is a distractor. It should be 288. We did do half of 8, so it should be 288. So that means those are wrong. So it's going to be 208 cubic meters. So yeah, this are wrong because even the units are wrong. So we probably didn't change the answer choices. Okay, let's look at number 2. Now number 2 says give the equation needed to solve for the missing angles. So last week we were doing this in the warm-up, so that means we're going to continue doing it. So if I knew those numbers, I would just add 3x plus x plus 40, and that's going to give you how much? 180. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and combine like terms, which is 3x and x, so that's going to be 4x plus 40, and that's going to equal 180. So the one that shows 4x plus 40 equals 180 is letter J. Now we're going to go ahead and solve it to determine angle D. So 4x plus 40 equals 180. So we're going to solve it. That's going to be subtract 40. We have to undo the addition first. So then this becomes 0 pairs. Now you have 4x is equal to 140. 140 divided by 4. X will going to give you 35. So that's 35. So now it's asking for angle D, but if you notice, angle D have 3x. So if x is 35, then that means I need to multiply 35 times 3. So that's going to give you 15. So that's 105. So my answer is letter D. Don't fall for that trick because they usually have you solve for x. But then you see that it's 35 and you're going to think it's letter C, which is wrong. So you need to multiply by 3. They were asking for angle F, and it would be 35. What we're doing today, we are starting Unit 5. Make sure you put in those tabs into your composition book before you glue this foldable in. So I'm going to show you how to fold it. I did copy it backwards. Sorry about that. But what you need to do is you need to turn it over. Okay, you're going to fold this in. And then fold the other one too. And now you have your foldable. So this is how it's going to be. It's going to look when you glue it into your composition book. That way when you open it up, it's all there. So make sure you fold it and then open it up and be ready to copy notes on it. So open up your foldable, and what we're going to be starting this unit is probability. Who knows probability or what that means?
Probably. Yeah.
Well, it's probable what something will happen. So basically, probability is actually a game of chance. Now, if you buy scratch-off tickets or lotto tickets, you guys are actually taking a chance to win something, right? And that's basically what we're doing. And we're not doing gambling or anything, but the probability of something happening, that's what we're going to do it, but now we're doing it mathematically. So what we're doing today is we're actually going to figure out the probability of something happening, okay? And we're gonna write it in different forms. So we're gonna go ahead and fill in this foldable, and we're gonna start with the vocabulary. So on the left side of your foldable, that's where all of your vocabulary is. So it says probability is the chance, oops, I don't know how to spell it. The chance that something will happen. It is written as a ratio, and a ratio is written as a fraction, decimal, and percent. So when you find the probability of something happening, you could write it either way. And I'll show you once we get to that point. Okay, sample space. Sample space is used to show all the possible outcomes of a probability. There are two ways to show a sample space. We have a list and the tree diagram. Now, the fundamental counting principles, usually we use it to find out if we did our sample space correctly. So it can be used to find the total possible outcomes. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to do the fundamental counting principle. So when you have a coin and you flip the coin, what are the two possible outcomes?
Heads or tails?
Heads or tails, right? So there's two of them. So that means I'm going to take two. Now, if you have a rolling number cube, how many outcomes does that have? 6. So then that means it's 6. So then that means that a sample space should have 12 possible outcomes. So because all you do is multiply 2 times 6. So when you're doing a sample space, and you use the counting principle, the fundamental counting principle, that's going to help you understand if you actually, or check to see if you actually did all the sample spaces. Okay? Now, when I say sample spaces, basically all you're doing is figuring out how many outcomes you could get from doing an event or two events. Because if I just flip a coin, the possible outcomes is just 2, right? But if I flip a coin and roll a dice, then it's different. So I'm going to show you a video so you could watch that quickly, and you could see what I mean. So on your foldable, you have the top part and the bottom part. This is the top part. On the top part, we're going to use the tree diagram. And the tree diagram, all you have to do is actually I always start with the smallest outcomes. So I know that the coin has 2 outcomes and the cube has 6 outcomes. So I'm going to start with the outcomes of a coin. So you have heads and you have tails, right? Okay, now that we have that, we're going to go ahead and combine them with what the outcomes of the cube is. So I know the cube has 1, has 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So all we did is, I know that the coin could fall on heads, and then the cube could fall either on 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And then also, with the tails, the cube has the same outcomes, so you're just combining those two. So now that you have done that, then all you have to do is count how many outcomes that is. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then this one, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So that means you have 12 outcomes. And basically, we're done. That's all we have to do. Just do the 12 outcomes. Okay, now with the other one, with number 2, it has 2 spinners are spun and a coin is tossed. What are all the possible outcomes? So now you have 3 events, 3 different possibilities. So now, again, I'm going to start with the smallest outcome. So I know this, the first spinner has how many outcomes?
2.
The first spinner?
4.
The second spinner?
2.
2. And then the coin? 2. So I could start with a spinner or I could start with a coin. It doesn't really matter. So I'm going to start with the spinner. So I'm going to go ahead and put B for blue and G for green. Okay, then I'm going to do my coin. And I know it has 2 possible outcomes, so I'm going to do heads and tails, heads and tails. And then the next spinner, I know it has 4. So that means I'm going to branch out 4 times from each of those. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Same thing over here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then 1, 2, 3, and 4. So now that we have that, we could go ahead and count the total outcomes.
16.
So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So this is 16 outcomes.
All you have to do basically is just look at how many outcomes and multiply it.
Yes, and that's another way you could do this. But sometimes they want you to actually list all the possibilities, and that's why you have to do it this way. So yeah, to check if you got the answer correct, all you do is multiply 4 times 2, and then times 2, and that's going to give you how many outcomes? 16, right? Same here. 2 times 6, that's going to give you 12. So either way, if they're just asking you for possible outcomes, then you could multiply it. But if they're asking you to list them, then you would need to use a tree diagram or list them themselves. Yes. Okay, so now on the second part of your foldable, we're going to do a list. And the list, all you have to do is just go ahead and list the possible outcome. So we're going to start with the coin, so that's head, and then it could land on 1. Then heads, it could land on 2. Heads land on 3. Heads land on 4. Heads land on 5. And heads land on 6. Then we're doing with tails. Tails land with 1. Tails lands with 2. Tails lands with 3. Tails lands with 4. And tails lands with 5. And one more, tails lands with 6. Okay, that's a list. So it's the same thing as a tree diagram, but now you're just listing them down. And you're going to be asked either list it or find the tree diagram. So you have to know both of them. So in this case, how many possible outcomes is it? Is it different than when we did before? No, it should be the same. So it's still 12 outcomes. And again, you could do the same thing. You can multiply 2 times 6, and that's going to give you 12 outcomes.
Can we do it that way?
You could do it either way, but you need to know both. Okay, so let's do the other one. For number 2, since we have 3 events, we have to list a possibility outcome for each event. So you have blue with tails and 1, blue tails 2, blue tells 3, blue tells 4. Oops. And then I also need blue heads 1, blue heads 2, blue heads 3, blue heads 4. And then we also need to do green. So green tells 1, green tells 2, green tells 3, green tells 4. And then also we have to do the heads. Green heads 1, green heads 2, green heads 3, and green heads 4. Yes. It is a little complicated when you're doing the list. So when it's a small event, like the one we had in number 1, it's easier to do the list. But when we have a little bit more complicated, or we keep adding more events, then the outcomes are larger. So sometimes we'll get confused with that, and the list sometimes we'll miss one. So I like the tree diagram more than the list, but we have to know both, so make sure you're practicing both. Any questions on either one of those? Okay, so again, if you remember, you could always check to see if you did it correctly. So 4 times 2 times 2, and that's going to give you 16, and that's what you had here. So you could always check. Now, you guys need to be very careful, because sometimes they'll put like tails, blue, and 1 to confuse you. They'll twist it around. They'll do tails, blue, and 1, thinking that you have another possible outcome, but you were listed already here. You were listed there already. So please don't get that confused. Any questions on this? Okay, well, we do have a practice, so I'm going to give it to you. It is front and back. Whatever you don't finish in class, you do it for homework. But that doesn't mean you get to sit for 10 minutes. You need to work on that homework. Okay, any questions? Okay.